Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Jay. Here back with another video. A couple of days ago on my birthday, we did the video on Dolly Parton, but unfortunately, it did not stick or record. So we're back doing it again. So here is the unfortunate news regarding Dolly Parton. As many people know, she passed away at the age of 80 on August the 25th, 2026. Um, and I'll just talk for first before we give a summary of her career and accomplishments in life. We'll talk about what I remember from her, growing up as a kid. What I how I remember seeing her. I first encountered Dolly Parton, of course, in the 1980s, the late 1980s. Particularly, my mother was a fan of the movie 9 to 5 uh, that Dolly made in 1980. And that was her film debut. That was when she first came out making films. But Dolly's actual career, and that's why I remember seeing her. But her actual career well, let's talk about her life. She was born on January the 19th, 1946, in a one-room cabin on the banks of Little Pigeon River in East Tennessee, Pittman Center, Tennessee. She was the fourth of 12 children born to Avie Lee Caroline, also Owens. Bill Owens is her uncle, another famous country singer. Robert Lee Patton Robert Lee, known as Bob Lee Patton, in the mountains of East Tennessee. Her family was a family of sharecroppers. Now, for those that don't know what a sharecropper is basically someone who lives on the land, uh, of another person. Like somebody owns the land and they work the land, and they're basically like it's like renting an apartment, but instead of renting an apartment, you rent a piece of land, and then whatever you make out of that land, you give a portion of it to the person who owns the land. We know about this practice in relation to a lot of former slaves, but also, as you can see with Dolly Parton's family, it applied to Caucasians as well. Um, Her father was illiterate, but yet she says he was one of the smartest people that she ever knew as far as making profit for the family. The mother uh, had 11 pregnancies. She had twins at one point. She was a mother of 12 by the age of 35. And Dolly's musical abilities come into play early on as a child. Um, she had poor health as a child. So her mother would keep her entertained with Smoky Mountain folklore. What this was, we talked about it before in the channel, the Scots-Irish community, or the Scots-Irish or Welsh community. See, in 1607, in an effort to Protestantize Ireland, King James the first Scottish king of England, of course, the author of the King James Bible, he encourages Welsh and Scottish people to immigrate to Ireland. So they have this tradition, and then they later come to America and they develop the folk tradition in the Appalachian Mountains. This was Dolly's home. This is the origin of the term hillbilly. The term hillbilly comes from uh, the William, uh, King William of England. There was a war in the in the 1690s called the War of the Two Kings, in which King William of Orange had his, there was a crisis on the throne of England. So he had his supporters, and his supporters were called the Hillbillies because they settled in the hills of Appalachia, the Billy Boys. So this is the lineage that um, Dolly Parton comes from, and they have a folk tradition. They have folk music, and this is the origins of what we call modern day country music. And it's a very oral tradition because much like Dolly's father, a lot of these people were not so literate. So the country music comes out of these, in addition to the African influences, because when escaped slaves would escape from slavery, they also would hide in the mountains, in the Appalachian Mountains. So they brought things like the banjo, while the Scots Irish brought things like the fiddle. So this is the origins of country. Her grandfather was a Pentecostal preacher, and she attended church regularly. So yes, um, religion was also a part of the legacy of the Scots Irish folks, because it was religion and it was music that kept them alive, because they've often been known as some of the poorer people in America, stricken by heavy poverty. Again, like I said, that's why they called them the hillbillies. A lot of times, hillbillies were used as a pejorative, were used as something to put them down by other people. Rednecks is another type of word, because a lot of these folks came from Northern Ireland and England as indentured laborers, people that wanted to come to the New World but couldn't afford it, so they would then lend out their services to somebody richer, and that somebody richer would sponsor them to come to America, and they would work for free for them for a while, and then they would be set free. You know what I mean? So this was, they never really got ahead in life, and a lot of country music songs um, revolve around religion. And Pentecostalism is an interesting one. It's a type of religion that is very American. It was deep in the American South, heavily involved with tent revivalism uh, in the Second Great Awakening, in the early 19th century and beyond. The greatest preachers in the United States come out of this tradition. Think Oral Roberts, think Billy Graham, think these individuals that come out of the Pentecostal tradition. It's a callback to Acts 1:1, the Feast of the Pentecost. So that's Pentecostalism, in a nutshell. She wrote her first song, "My Tennessee Mountain Home," in the 70s. She was in love with this lifestyle, this country folk lifestyle. She began performing in 1956 as a child, singing on the radio in the East Tennessee area. By the age of 10, she appeared on the Cass Walker Show in Knoxville. At 13, she recorded the single "Puppy Love" for the Louisiana label God Band Records, and she appeared at the Grand Ole Opry. Now, what the Grand Ole Opry is like, think of when we think of like R&B music, we think of the Apollo Theater, right? We think, it's the basically Grand Ole Opry is the mecca of of um of country music. At 19, she signed with Momentum Records, and this was 1965. Here, she was perceived as a bubblegum pop artist. In other words, you had your country music was one of the original genres that when records first started coming out in the early 20th century, They divided, of course, like they do now, music into genres. And country music was originally known as, again, hillbilly music, bluegrass. It comes right out of Kentucky. That's why they call Kentucky the bluegrass state. Right from the Appalachian folks, they took their style of folk music, which has its, ultimately has its roots in England, Ireland, and Wales, and that's and they made it into music. So think of the Carter family, think of Johnny Cash, somebody who Dolly collaborated with early on when she was singing, and those are the deep roots of country music. But obviously, like all music, they want to cross over into pop music and pop records. So they needed somebody pretty. So they had her, right? And she was very attractive. She was young. So she signs with Combine Records, and her uncle, Bill Owens, and her have two chart-topping singles. Put It Off Till Tomorrow in 1965, and The Company You Keep in 1967. She also wrote a song for Skeeter Davis that hit number 11, Fuel to the Flames in 1967. Her songs were re-recorded by the likes of Kitty Wells and possibly the greatest country music star ever in existence, Hank Williams Jr. At age 19, this is still in Momentum Records. She then switches to Momentum Records, and she records "Happy Happy Birthday Baby," but it charted, but it failed to reach the hot Billboard Hot 100 because they wanted to make her a pop artist in the beginning because they saw that country was basically an all male thing in the beginning. You know what I mean? You had Jimmy Rogers. He's basically considered the father of country music, at least modern country music. Um, and you had Hank Williams and Hank Williams Jr. And you had the Carter family, June Carter and Johnny Cash. But it was hard for for new artists to break through. So they saw that she was more of a pop artist. So they came out with that. In 1967, she released her first full-length album, Hello Dolly. And it was also in 1967 that she began to work with Porter Wagner. Porter Wagner was another country singer, but he was more of a showman. You know what I mean? He was more of an entertainer type country singer. For many of you guys that are wrestling fans, you might think of, for example, in country music and professional wrestling, intertwined, interconnected, coming from the same roots. Musically, the creators of country music are the same people in the sports world that created professional wrestling. Rural, the rural white community of English and Irish descent. You know what I mean? So, but think of the character of Jeff Jarrett, his character, Double J. This was modeled by Vince McMahon's own admission. This was modeled on Porter Wagner. So she, a very flashy, ostentatious country singer. She begins to work with him, and she works with him from 1967 to 1975, and he becomes very important in her life later, as we shall see down the line. Her first solo single for RCA Victor Records is Just Because I'm a Woman. Because again, we're getting into the 1960s, and even though country music is behind rock music and behind R&B music in terms of the social progress, because the people that produce country music and the people that are in control of country music, they are conservatives, obviously. Obviously, we talk at length, ad nauseum, of white Southerners and white Southern roots and white Southern ideas regarding race and politics. They're right wingers, so they're not necessarily cued into the feminist movement like say R&B or rock would be, right? Even though rock technically is a descendant of country music, rock and roll is a combination of country music, rhythm and blues music, and jazz music. But what remained country, what remained hillbilly, was mostly right wing songs, songs about patriotism, songs about the old world, things of that nature. So they're not going to necessarily speak about feminism. But Dolly is different. Dolly has a different political outlook, as we shall see. Even though she never really expressed that politics, she wanted to remain apolitical in that sense. But she was a feminist. So she comes out with "Just Because I'm a Woman," and she also comes out with a song "In the Good Old Days When Times Were Bad." In other words, it's kind of weird that by the time we get to this era of country music, they're actually celebrating the Great Depression. You wouldn't think that the times of the Great Depression are something to be celebrated, but hey, they were looking back with nostalgia to this period of American history when they felt like religiosity was at its height. Families were all together and stuff. So that's basically what this song talks about. And this was 1968, at the height of when things were changing, around the rest of the country. By 1970, both herself and Porter Wagner become frustrated by her lack of success. For some reason, at this point, by the 1970s, even though this was a renaissance of country music, as we shall see later, because of her, country was finding it hard to break through to the pop aesthetic. Rock was ruling the charts, R&B and soul were ruling the charts. Country was having a very hard time. So she was wondering, why am I not breaking through? What's really happening? So they come up with a new formula for her, and she goes back to the roots. She re-records Mule Skinner Blues, which is a song by Jimmy Rogers, who, like I said, by many is considered the father of modern country. He took the blues and he mixed it in with traditional yodeling, traditional bluegrass music, and kind of modernized it. So she does a reworking of his song. And her number one single, Joshua, was released in February of 1971. For the next 2 years, she had numerous solo hits, including her song, Coat of Many Colors, which is an allusion to, of course, the Bible. Love Forever in Your Kiss, Touch of a Woman, and My Tennessee Mountain Home, and Traveling Man, which is a song. Traveling Man in 1973 was a song that was covered by Cher, which kind of fits her better than Cher. Cher doesn't have, listen to the lyrics of Traveling Man. Cher later did that song, but Dolly, did it better. And then by 1973, we get to Jolene. Jolene is perhaps her breakthrough hit. That's her number one hit. That is the song that is loved by myself. But I know Lisa, my co-host, loves that song. My fiance loved that song. We were gonna name our daughter if we had one Jolene. Everybody loves that song, and even Beyonce later covers that song with a modern day interpretation. I think that's her signature hit. But by the time we get to 1974, is an even bigger hit for Dolly, and that is "I Will Always Love You." And what "I Will Always Love You" is a tribute to. Lisa says Beyonce's version sucks. "I Will Always Love You" is a tribute to Porter Wagner. Dolly and Porter Wagner decide to part ways. He was her producer and her mentor for many years, but they decide in 1974 to go their separate ways, and that's what the song is. The song is a tribute to him. And of course, we know that it's a beautiful song. At around the same time, another Tennessee legend from Memphis now this time, wants to record one of her songs, and that is Elvis Presley. And he offers her millions of dollars, but she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't like Tom Parker. That's one of the reasons, and she just flat out refuses. And Elvis at this time, this is the mid to late 1970s. He's kind of on his downward slide. It's interesting about him because he wanted to do for the longest time when he was a chart-topping success with Sam Phillips and stuff. He wanted to distance himself from country music and make himself more rock and roll. But now he's kind of going back to his roots, and she just didn't want it. She just didn't want him to cover the song. And by 1974, she releases "Please Don't Stop Loving Me" and "The Bargain Store." Is when she leaves between 1974 and 1980. When she leaves Porter Wagner, she then gets a broader audience. This is when she branches out. This is when she is no longer just the country music star, but she starts to collaborate with pop stars like Linda Ronstadt. She even does a cover of "My Girl" by The Temptations, and she gains an R&B and pop and rock audience that she didn't previously have. And that's when she really, breaks out, even winning a Grammy Award for Best Female Vocalist in 1978 for her album "Here You Come Again." She does a Barbara Walters sit-down interview in 1977, and where she talks about her life. And in 1978, she appears on the Carol Burnett Show as well as Cher. So it's between 1974 and 1980 where the Dolly Parton that we know and the Dolly Parton that we love becomes a fixture in American pop culture. It's also during, and that's when she does the Kenny Rogers duet, "Islands in the Sky," later covered by Maya, ODB, and Pras. You guys know the song. Ghetto superstar, that is what you are. Well, that's a Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers song reworked. And the original was "Islands in the Sky." It's called "Islands in the Sky." I'm not going to sing it, but that's that song. And by 19, and of course that's when she starts to do movies. She's becoming, because country music kind of experienced in the late 70s or in the early 80s, kind of experienced a renaissance in the sense that it was on people's radar. You had in 1980, you had Urban Cowboy come out starring John Travolta. People were interested in country western music and culture. And then in the 2000s, of course, but by later on, 1987, she returns back to her country music roots. With several other stuff, and by 2021 to 2026, her death, she does a Las Vegas residency, which we talked about what a Las Vegas residency is. She also has the 9 to 5 stage musical that she did based on the movie. In other business ventures, she opens up Dollywood in 1968. She was a very smart businesswoman and a very smart entrepreneur, had an entrepreneurial spirit. One of the things I wanted to mention, like I said, there are many people in the in other genres of music that covered her stuff. Lisa says Beyonce's version of Jolene sucks because here's the thing with Beyonce's version of Jolene, it is different. The original Jolene was about a woman who about a woman who um, was worried about her husband falling in love with another falling in love with another woman known as Jolene, and Dolly Parton basically bowing out and saying that she cannot compete with this woman that her husband's in love with. The Beyonce version of Jolene is not about that. The Beyonce version of Jolene is the woman. Beyonce is confidently declaring that she is better than Jolene. That's the total opposite of the original Dolly Parton Jolene. The original Dolly Parton of Jolene is saying, um, you know, I can never compete with you, Jolene. You know, you have eyes of emerald green, locks full of flaming red hair, and um, ivory white skin. That's totally different than the Jolene that Beyonce's talking about. But it's whatever. But I wanted to get to the crux of what I'm talking about as far as Dolly Parton's covering. One of the things that I loved about Dolly that I found out in my research, 1992. We know the movie The Bodyguard comes out, and Whitney Houston covers the song "I Will Always Love You." She puts her own spin on it. Now, all of the proceeds that Dolly Parton received, or vast majority of the proceeds, millions of dollars that she received, Dolly Parton donated that money to the black community of Nashville, Tennessee. Now, when the song came out and when Whitney Houston became more synonymous with the song than Dolly Parton, because the new generation tends to think, at least my generation, and I'm sure with Lisa the same thing, tends to think of the song "I Will Always Love You" as a Whitney Houston song, not as a Dolly Parton song. And I recall the interview with Diane Sawyer, in which Diane Sawyer, I don't know if Diane Sawyer is a racist or what, probably is. She says to her, "Does it bother you? Now, why even bring this up? Does it bother you that a black woman is more synonymous with your song that you wrote than you?" And like, okay, if you're like, if Diane Sawyer is not a racist, why even bring that up? Why even bring the race of the person up if you're not racist? So, and Dolly Parton says, no, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't bother me in the slightest. In fact, I'm glad that it happens. So it keeps my song alive. So, and that is an example of putting. Lisa says because back then race was a big issue, right? Okay, yeah, but I think she was trying to go Dolly because Dolly is a white Southern woman, and they expect a white Southern woman and a black person to be antagonists towards each other because of history. You know, you know. But that is an example of the "I will always love you," putting your own spin on it, meaning something and then meaning something else. You know what I mean? Like the "I will always love you" that Dolly was talking about was the friendship "I will always love you," whereas the "I will always love you" the Whitney one is a romantic relationship, obviously depicted in in um, in the uh, Bodyguard. So, but it works. It's one of the best. It's one of the best versions, and she appeared in so many, movies and TV shows. Steel Magnolias in 1989, Blue Valley Songbird in 1999, of course, Joyful Noise, Rhinestones, alongside Sylvester Stallone. Lisa says, everyone on the internet was saying since Whitney passed and now Dolly Parton passed. Who, who, who will sing I Will Always Love You? Yes, it's true. Um, these two women, the song was synonymous with them. Uh, Dolly did so now what? Dolly did so many movies and TV shows and stuff like that. She was always all over. Um, she even did a she had a short-lived show on NBC in the early '80s, and Hulk Hogan appeared on there, and her and Hulk Hogan did a skit. It was like a soap opera show. Her and Hulk Hogan did a skit where they actually got married. You know what I mean? She was in the Beverly Hillbillies. That's why I remember her too. The Beverly Hillbillies movie version. She was in that. She was just all over, man. She won a Golden Globe for Best Actress in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Um, she was in Romeo and Juliet and Joyful Noise in 2012 with Queen Latifah. That was a cool movie. I remember seeing that in theaters, right? She was in it. Kenny Rogers was in it. Queen Latifah was in it. And Kiki Palmer was also in it, which is crazy because the day after was like Kiki Palmer's. Yeah, I did. I saw it. I saw it in theaters. I did. I saw it. I saw it in theaters. Yeah. Kiki Palmer's birthday was like the day after Dolly passed. Um, so yeah, she was just a presence in all of media, and it bears noting that and I don't want to sound. I'm going to try to make this sound like me being a man the best way I can without sounding like I'm objectifying her. It bears noting that part of her image was her body shape. Let's just put it that way. Uh, she was known as a well endowed individual, and that was part of her image. But so famous she was that in 1997, when they cloned the first sheep, the sheep was named what? Dolly. That's how famous she was. And it was often wondered if she had ever done plastic surgery, and she admits that she had. She said that the way she became, her gaudy image, as it were, was her escapism from poverty. She crafted this image of this buxom beauty with large breasts in order to escape, poverty. A bunch of makeup and all that stuff, very similar to Tammy Faye Baker, Jim Baker's wife, the televangelist. Very similar. A lot of makeup, a lot of gaudiness, as it were. That was their image. Down home country girl, a representative of the impoverished, a champion of the working class. kind of this working class image. As John Lennon said, a working class hero is something to be, and that definitely was what Dolly Parton was. So when she, uh, similarly to like a female version of like a Stone Cold Steve Austin, representing that same sort of down home Southern type image. He represents for women as opposed to men. Um, but people loved her, man. When she passed away, she had the cancer. She had the cancer for quite a while, but she didn't want to go public with it. But actually, she told her sister in private to donate all the proceeds to cancer foundations. So Dolly Parton was real charitable with her stuff, and she would often take part in military concerts. During the Iraq War, she went down there during the Persian Gulf War in the 90s. She was synonymous too. A side of her was synonymous with her philanthropy as well as her performances. So, rest in peace to Dolly Parton. And it's sad that she had to go now because she worked so hard to bring country music to the forefront. And right now, at least since 2019, what we are experiencing in the music world is a renaissance of country music. Country music right now is on the top of the charts everywhere. You know what I mean? Morgan Wallen's becoming a star. Ella Langley, and many people consider choosing Texas to be the successor to Jolene in terms of a song about a woman who is rejected by a man for various reasons, and is basically in the song bowing out, saying that she cannot compete. And this song has been on the charts, on the Billboard charts for 18 weeks, becoming the number one song, non-holiday song ever in history, while tying with Old Town Road, which in itself is another country song. So country music right now is experiencing a renaissance in ways that we haven't seen in a very long time, since the days of Dolly Parton. And so sad that we say goodbye to the legend, the legend in country music and the queen of country music. Right now in country, the spotlight is on country music. Peace, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, Lisa, for contributing, and welcome back to the channel. Peace. And I'm sure, like, if you were to talk, and it's funny because with Ella Langley, she's from Alabama, but the song praises Tennessee, because the character in the song and the character in the video is from Tennessee. So kind of like seeing herself kind of as a successor to where Dolly Parton was. Peace.